Okay, it looks like we're ready to start. So hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Jessica Keefe and I'm the grants manager here at APSA. I work with Megan, who's also on the webinar on the DDRIG program. And I'm just gonna go over the format of the webinar quickly before we move on to our panelists. So each panelist will introduce themselves and then speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then at the end, there will be a question and answer segment after they conclude their talks. So you can go ahead and use the question and answer function to type in your questions. Everyone can see your questions, so it's not just the panelists. So if you could monitor the questions that are coming in for repeats, that'd be great. And so if someone asks a question that you're really interested in hearing the answer to, or that was the same question you had, you can go ahead and upvote that question, and we're going to use those upvotes to set the priority for the questions that are going to be answered. So I'll read the questions out loud and the panelists can answer them as they see fit. And I'd also just like to offer a big thank you to the 2020 review panel members who have agreed to participate in this, despite the crazy times and the semester winding down. I know that's really hectic. So we're going to go ahead and start. I think we're going to start with Elizabeth, and we're going to move on to Cameron, and then we're going to move on to Candace. And they'll introduce themselves at the start of their talk. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you. No, I'm happy to do this. I very much enjoyed reading through the applications and the projects and seeing all the really amazing creative things that are being done in the field. Makes me excited for what's going to be coming down the pipe. I'm Elizabeth Seamans, or you can call me Beth. I'm an associate professor at the University of Houston. My research focuses more on U.S. electoral behavior, public opinion. I do a lot with surveys and experiments, so I can speak more to some of the types of evaluations and panels like that, the applications. So as far as writing these, I was really thinking about it because they're challenging. So one, don't get discouraged if it's going to take you a few drafts. I think you have some challenges, and you need to show that you've really thought through your project and that you've thought through all of these different things that you want to do. But at the same time, obviously, we're aware that you haven't done them yet, that this is what you're trying to get money for. So one example of that is, I know there tends to be this, do I need pilot data? If you're somebody that wants to go out and collect an original survey or do an original experiment, well, how do you get pilot data? You need money to get pilot data, and you're trying to apply to get money. So what I would say, with all of this is, the biggest thing would be to show that you've thought out the various aspects of your project, even if you are still, planning to do a pilot study. Obviously, we know you're still working on it, but you want to show that at this stage, when you're writing this application, that you have thought through some of these potential issues that somebody on the committee that might be reading this might think of. So, again, I tend to live in the world of survey and experimental research. So if you're thinking about fielding an experiment, don't just say, well, I'm going to have some treatments. Show us that you've thought through your treatments, even if pre-testing those treatments is going to be part of the money that you're seeking. That's fine. We understand that. But it's nice to show that you've actually thought about what those treatments might be. If you're planning an experiment, sometimes you'll see somebody with this great 2x3x3 design. Are you planning on analyzing that with a triple interaction? Are you going to do a subgroup analysis? If so, have you thought about whether you're going to have enough statistical power with your N to actually get traction on that? So again, just showing the thoughtfulness behind the process, even if, again, we know that you're trying to get money so you can execute and do this. You haven't done it yet. We understand that, but show the thoughtfulness behind that process. That when you are creating a survey, are you using validated measures that you've taken from other places in the literature? If your innovation is that you want to validate a measure, that's great, but then show us the theory and what led you to create this and why it should be successful once you do execute the project. Convince us of that, okay, I haven't done this yet, but here's evidence or theory or whatever it is that I have that I can try to convince you that this actually will work if you give me the money and I can execute this. So that's one thing, showing that you've really thought through your project. I would say a second big thing, big picture thing, as I was reading through, is that many people had a tendency to talk about the literature review and more of the literature review side of their dissertation in these proposals. And then they would sort of scrimp on when they were actually talking about the hypotheses they wanted to test. Emphasize what your contribution is. Obviously, you need to demonstrate us where your work fits within the existing literature, but do so in a way that shows what your contribution is and that shows us what your theory and how that fits. Don't spend too much of your proposal space recapping to us what others have done. Do so in a way that really demonstrates how your work fits into that and how it motivates your own original ideas and your original theories. And I think related to that is with some of the applications, people would talk about, here's all the things I've done in chapters 1 and 2, and I'm asking for money for chapter 3. But again, chapter 3 got very little of the relative space in the application. So make sure that, I know there's certain guidelines and parameters you have to follow when writing these applications, but you want as much as you can to be focused on your original contribution and the portion of your dissertation that you're seeking funding for. Obviously, talk about, again, if you already have a chapter 2 completed, go ahead and tell us about that. That's great. It helps us understand the bigger picture and how it's going to fit in with your work. But make sure that you're not doing so at the cost of again, talking to the panelists, the reviewers, and telling us all how your project is original, how you're going to be able to execute it, and what really this funding is going to do to improve your project, and why this funding is necessary to taking your project up to the next level. So those are just a couple big picture things that I can think of in reading through. Again, you're selling us your research, and it's a skill that I've been doing this for a lot longer than I realized. Sometimes I go, wow, I still struggle with it myself. So but again, talk through, hopefully you have advisors and people that are reading drafts and helping you. Even if you have a friend who maybe isn't directly related to your field, ask them to read it and to see if when they step away, do they have a clear picture of what it is you want the funding for, how it is going to contribute to the literature, because not everybody reading your application is going to be an expert in your little segment of the field as well. So you have to keep that in mind, that getting, even if your friend or your roommate is in a completely different subfield, they can still give you some helpful advice, I think, in crafting these applications. Because again, it is a difficult skill. I struggle with and grant proposals all the time still, but those are the big picture things I think that I would say make sure you're emphasizing.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. Thanks, Beth. I thought that was actually a really great broad overview. And of course, by the time it gets to Candace, we're going to be like, what do I add to this? But I'll try to pick out a few additional things that I can maybe add. So everyone, my name is Cameron Teese. I'm a professor of international relations at Arizona State University. I'm a pretty broadly trained IR person. I do work in conflict, IPE, and foreign policy. So I think that's why I often get selected to serve on review panels, because I can kind of cover a lot of the bases. So I would say everything Beth said is spot on, I think. A few other things that I might emphasize, and maybe a few tips just from things I've seen over the years. I think Beth was absolutely right to point out that, remember, your audience is a sort of widely educated field of political scientists, right? But they're not going to be experts in your particular area. For the IR folks, I think sometimes this is a little more difficult for us, because the Americanists and comparativists often, they have often the same concepts and terminology. They're studying domestic political systems, et cetera. I mean, some parts of comparative get closer to IR, obviously, but for the IR proposals, I would, specifically tell people, make sure that you're speaking in a language that can be readily understood. Sometimes we go down, we start talking about dyads and stuff like that, and I see Americanicized, not to poke fun at the Americanists, but that's not a language they're used to talking in. So think about that when you're writing, and that's also a good reminder. Have other people read it who aren't in your field, so that they can walk away and say, I understand what you're describing and what you're asking. Another thing to keep in mind is, if you don't succeed this first time around, you may be able to apply again, right? So if you start out this process early enough, and maybe the first time you get feedback that says, well, not quite this time, apply again. I've seen people apply multiple times and are successful on that usually that second time, based on the feedback they get back. So some other things to think about, just in terms of thinking about the actual proposal, I would, with that proposal summary, it's often the first thing that people read just to get a sense of what they're getting into. And sort of like an abstract or the introduction to a paper, try to make that really compelling, right? Try to draw your reader in. I mean, we're human beings sitting on this panel, and we've maybe been assigned 20 of these to read. So, that proposal summary that people often start with is where you can really draw your reader in and think, oh, I'm really excited to read this, or, oh, it's another survey experiment on such and such, right? So I think that's something that I like to recommend, is focus on that proposal summary just to make sure you can draw your reader in. Related to that, make sure you have a really compelling and clearly stated research question. Sometimes I've seen proposals where it isn't really clear what the research question is, or it can be stated in different ways that sort of seems to evolve in the proposal. Try to avoid that, right? Try to make sure you're really clear about what it is that you're proposing to study. I agree with Beth on the lit review. You don't want to go overboard, but one thing that does really manage to bother, particularly senior people, is when you don't seem to be fully aware of a literature. So make sure you've devoted adequate space to it. So, because I've heard we have lots of conversations about, well, I think this has already been done here in this study that they're not mentioning. They've done something very similar. So yeah, don't go overboard on the lit review, but you've got to make sure that you've covered your bases. But really, I think Beth was absolutely right. The stuff that we'll find compelling is, do you have sort of a novel theory or a novel empirical test of a sort of existing theory? That's kind of where we start to get excited. So as Beth said, don't scrimp on that part of the proposal. We want to see what it is that you're doing that's innovative, right? And similarly, when it comes to the method, make sure it's appropriate to what you're doing and fully explained, right? Because this is one way that people can ascertain whether you are going to be able to carry out this study or not. So how well you can describe whatever it is, the method that you're planning to use. Think about, whether your research plan and your timeline is feasible. Again, you may have never actually carried out a full study like this before, so consult with your advisor and others, because you will have experts on the panel who will say, there's no way this person can do all of this in the next year, right? Or maybe they could do half of this study, but not the other half they're proposing. So make sure that your plan and your timeline are feasible. One thing to also consider is, we evaluate these on both intellectual merit and broader impact. And I would say most studies do a really good job on the intellectual merit side of things and probably undersell the broader impact. So keep an eye on that, I think, when you are working on the proposal. Also pay careful attention to the data management plan. That isn't just a throwaway thing. I mean, NSF is funding this through APSA, so they want to make sure that the data is archived and available to others, right? So pay close attention to that. I've seen people really get hung up on the data management plan in the panel before because there basically isn't one, or it says, I'm going to embargo this data forever until I publish something. You really can't do that. So I think that's probably all I have to say. I mean, I'm looking forward to your questions. But this is a great program, and I do hope that nothing we say here discourages you. In fact, hopefully we'll encourage you to apply for this. So thank you.
Okay, so Cameron and Beth are right. I don't have anything else to add. I'm Candace Watts-Smith. I'm an associate professor of political science and African American studies at Penn State. I study American politics, mostly around racial attitudes and political behavior, and sometimes I do policy-related work. So I think I maybe to step back and just talk about the process from our side, maybe is that, well, one, let me say this. I really enjoy doing this reviewing because it reminded me, good projects reminded me of why I wanted to become a political scientist. And that was almost always like a little spark, and you're like, oh, this is a good project right here, right? So that's like a je ne sais quoi. I'm not sure you can quite tell someone how to do that, but I remember having that feeling with some of the projects, and you know, just that was usually a sign of a good project. The panel is a really diverse group of people across the discipline, the subfields, race, gender, orientation toward research, methodological strategies, you know, ways of thinking, types of schools. So there are a lot of people in the room who care and have their eye on different aspects of research, but also questions of equity too. And I'll bring this up in a little bit. So actually Beth kind of mentioned this earlier, and she didn't frame it as a question of equity, right? She said, you know, sometimes it helps to have a pilot study, but you're trying to get money to do the pilot study. And so, right, and so there are going to be some people who have pilot studies, but we take note of the kind of resources that people already have, right? So we're not stacking the deck to only fund people who already have all of the goods, right? We are really looking, or at least the panel that I was on was really looking to kind of ensure a distribution, a fair allocation of resources for excellent projects. There were a lot of just kind of well-known, respected scholars. I was thrilled about learning from the proposals, the students through the proposals, and then also from my colleagues as we, you know, had full-on conversations about each of the proposals. So all the proposals do get, we read a lot of them, but they get a good amount of attention, each of them. We we kept our eye on the time to make sure that everyone's proposal got a fair assessment. Okay. Okay. So one thing that both Cameron and Beth pointed out is that your proposal will go to both experts and non-experts in your area. So from my perspective, when I would get a proposal in my area of expertise, things that I looked for were, as was already mentioned, is this person knowledgeable about the previous literature, but also do they know where they sit, fit, and contribute to that larger literature? One rookie move that you should avoid in your proposal and all writing, generally speaking, is nobody has ever done so-and-so. I'm the first to do it. It's a rookie move, and it makes people mad. So one way is to maybe perhaps come at it in terms of, you know, my contribution to the conversation that has been sparked by A, B, and C is X, and, you know, you can add on, right? So, you know, all of the work that all of us do is an effort to build scaffold. You know, we all provide a unique contribution, but it is a building. We're building towards something. We're not just kind of coming out of nowhere with a new idea or whatever. I think almost none of us do that. Okay. And then just to reiterate, we want to see, when I'm looking in my area of expertise, is the question really clear, and is the contribution into some, political, providing new insight into a political phenomenon. When I was an outside expert, like I was not an expert, I would think to myself, was I able to be brought up to speed on what I needed to know in order to understand why this question is important? Did I learn something new? And is this research relevant? Will it help me better understand some political phenomenon that I see in the world? So, I guess like from the non-expert side, from the outside viewers, it's like, oh yeah, like I understand that there's this conflict and this will help us understand it, or this is how this is going to be applied to some kind of real world phenomenon. Okay, just a couple of smaller points, and mostly just to dovetail and to reiterate some of the previous points made. Do you have a plan? Is the plan clear? Is it feasible? Is it reasonable within a certain period of time that you said that you're going to do it? I think that the thing that Cameron brought up about broader impacts, actually, focusing on that does the work of helping you to connect with people who are outside of your field. So if you can explain the broader impact, then someone who's not in your area can understand why this is important, relevant, interesting, and necessary. One thing that came up quite a few times was the ethics of a project, especially in like field experiments, that you care about the ethical considerations of the work that you do. And quite frankly, just because your IRB says that it's okay, it doesn't make it ethical. So that was something that, came up a couple of times. And then I guess I would say one of the signs that I'm not really sure that people think about how to articulate this, but it shows in that, do you have people? Do you have personnel and mentors? And one way that we can tell if you have support, right? So no researcher does work alone, not really, people have editors at the very least, or they have colleagues, they have people, and the graduate students, hopefully they have really good mentors around them. And those could be faculty mentors or, your own colleagues, but it shows in the writing, it shows in the framing, and it shows in, just the kind of quality of the submission itself. So, we need to also, there needs to be a signal that you're going to be supported in your research. And there's just kind of, just the quality of the writing does a lot of work of telling us, yeah, this person has someone that they can call on to read over, to check over, to question their thinking, to push them. And so I think that's mostly probably an encouragement to be vulnerable with your colleagues, your peers, and your faculty mentors, for them to look at it before you see it, because we can tell if someone hasn't seen it, if you're the only person who's seen it. This last point, I'm not sure, I've gone back and forth about whether I wanted to say this or not. Sometimes on Twitter be like, these awards are like, you could like flip a coin. There's so many of them. That's not true. The fact of the matter is that there's a rubric. There's at least 3 people who read over the applications, and there's pretty good intercoder reliability. And so the projects that were excellent were viewed as excellent among experts within the field and non-experts within the field. And so, usually there's a combination of just having a really excellent, well-written, clearly articulated proposal, and someone just standing up on the table for your project, that they saw the potential for it and the necessity of it. So, those two together, those two things together help push people along. So I'm saying that to say, and I think probably also just to reiterate, is that if you don't get it the first time, that's okay. Take it as an R&R. And that's usually what most of us get the first time going around well, we kind of work toward that. Over time, R&Rs are the things that you get first. So think about it like that. And hopefully you see an acceptance as a support for your ideas, and a non-acceptance not as it's not necessarily a rejection, but maybe feedback insofar as that there are areas for improvement.
Thank you, everyone. So you guys can go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A function and upvote the questions that you're interested in, and I'll read them out loud. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for that, there was one question that Beth was kind enough to answer in the chat, but I wanted to read it out loud anyway to see if the other two reviewers had perspectives. So that question was, for data from interviews, how should we address the issue of sharing data and making it available to others, especially if you cannot share it under IRB protocols?
I'll just start. So I wasn't sure what was going on there. Sorry. So I got ahead of it. So my suggestion was, that's why there is a section within the proposal that asks you to address ethics. And so this would be something that you could explain there, but you would, you'd want to just make it very clear that this is why you, like, if you're not going to be able to share your data, just explain why. Very clearly say that whether you're following the best practices within your own institution's IRB, best practices within the field. I don't do a lot of it. That's not my area of specialty. Also, though, there may be some ways with data that you're able to release a stripped down version that has absolutely no identifiers. And so maybe that's, a compromise. But these would be all things that you would use that section of the application to address.
It's maybe even a bigger, sort of a broader issue. There's more use of proprietary data now as well. And this can also be kind of an issue. So if you're using proprietary data of some sort, you'd want to explain, well, why that can't be shared either. But if someone wanted to replicate your work, how could they go about doing it? I think that's because replication is part of science, right? It's part of how we know sort of results are valid. So hopefully there's some alternative available if for some reason your data cannot be released. But I don't know. I don't work enough in surveys to know how that works.
Okay, the second question is, can you give some advice for those who will be working with a more traditional qualitative ontological perspective and don't have explicit hypotheses that will be tested?
So I remember that there were one or two projects like that really just stood out and really blew everyone away. And they were more kind of like APD projects. And then there was one that was more of a historical analysis. So they didn't, they knew where they knew what archives they wanted to go to. They knew what was at the archives. They just had to go there and find the specifics. They kind of, they brought everyone up to speed on, okay, well, here's what we already know about certain things, but there's this element missing. There's a component of this story that's missing. And that was fine. So actually, I didn't really see among the panelists a bias necessarily toward projects that didn't have specific hypotheses tested. What we really focused on was the sophistication and the clarity of the contribution that would be made through the process of doing the research. So I wouldn't discourage anybody who is using qualitative work or historical work, archival work, that they simply just make clear what it is that they're trying to head toward, what question that they are trying to answer and uncover for us.
So I 100% agree with that, and I think as Candace was talking, it really made me think. I cannot emphasize enough how much a well-written proposal, regardless of the field or the topic, that is just makes a big, big difference. The clarity of your writing, again, I don't do qualitative work, but I certainly reviewed some and looked at some proposals and thought, wow, this is really great, because overall what you're looking, you just want to be very clear that, so maybe I'm doing this more inductive, I don't have my specific hypothesis yet, but here's my plan, here are the things I'm looking at, here's how it fits into the literature, here's what I hope my ultimate contribute, right? That you're still hitting some specifics on these other things, even if the research is a little more exploratory or in those earlier state, just a different type of research, because again, and I'm speaking as a quantitative person, this isn't the area I work in, but if you can write a compelling proposal that sells me on, yes, this needs to be done, this is absolutely a valuable, awesome project, and this person has thought through the execution of the project. Again, the nuts and bolts of saying, well, it's not just that I'm going to go and I'm, completely still at point A on my research proposal, that, this is a very well thought out project. It's just a different type of thinking than some of, the more quantitative work and the way quantitative work is done. But to show that, again, all of the same thought has gone into that. And again, the clarity of the writing really helps with that.
I just add that I think, the qualitative methods, the amount of sort of effort that's been expended to really demonstrate the methodological foundations of that kind of work has, over the past 20 years, exploded. So qualitative methods are methods just like quantitative methods. And I think to convince people here, you just need to show that you are steeped in that, whatever qualitative method you're using, you're steeped in that literature. So you've got the best practices, you know sort of how people are thinking about the application of these methods today, whether it's a causal or a more interpretive approach, right? There's lots now written on qualitative methods. So I don't think that should stand in the way either.
Okay, the next question is pretty similar and related, although I do want to note before I read the question that your project does need to have an empirical approach to receive funding. So the question is, do you receive a good number of applications in political theory? Do you have any tips for political theorists applying to do less popular methods in political science, such as archival and ethnographical work?
The thing is that the proposal is asking you what you're using the funding for. So if you can tell us what you're going to use the funding for, then that's the thing that we are evaluating. So yeah, I think just to reiterate, I didn't notice any pushback on, yeah. If there are data to be gathered, there are, places that you need to go, information that you need to get. These are the things that you want to make clear to the panelist.
And just reiterating there, again, when I say, specifics help, I know that certain archives are limited. They may, access, I think it goes a lot to your proposal if you're able to say that I've already contacted this would be, these are the opportunities for individuals to go, to make it very clear that, again, what you're doing is feasible, that if you want to go do archival work, if you want to go, that you actually would have access to it. And that, this is something you've thought about, not just, oh, I have this idea that I'd love to go do this, but you haven't actually investigated that it's possible yet. Because sometimes, unfortunately, we find, right, that if you think, oh, nobody's done this before, sometimes there's a reason. And it's, sometimes, just a very practical reason, not because it lacks intellectual merit, but that they don't let anybody in. So, again, just make sure that you have those details in there. And I think that appeases some people who may be more skeptical of certain types of work when this is really thought out.
I was trying to think if I've ever seen just a pure traditional political theory application, and I don't think I have. So my guess is you're doing something that would be kind of non-traditional political theory. As long as there's some kind of empirical implication to what you're doing that can be investigated, I think that's totally fine. But sort of straight up traditional kind of political theory probably wouldn't normally fit within the guidelines of this program.
Okay, the next question is, preparing an application is relatively time costly. Are there particular types of projects that have such a low likelihood of successful funding that they're not worth submitting? Or if an applicant comes from an institution with alternate funding available, would they be less likely to be funded by APSA and therefore it's not worth the time or cost to apply?
Should I start again?
Go for it.
So I mean, we saw such a wide range of ideas across the discipline. So, I mean, I guess maybe the only proposal that's not worth submitting is a poorly written one, or, one that you just kind of decided, let's try it. Maybe that's one. And not to be flip, but I mean, I think that as faculty members, mentors ourselves, we wouldn't discourage anyone from applying if it were, relevant and if the proposal was well prepared. I don't know if the question that you're asking about resources is in response to something that I said earlier about, for example, having money for pilot funds. So I guess to say, I don't think that we penalize people for having resources up front, but we didn't penalize people for not having resources up front. I think maybe that's a better way to say it.
I agree. Picking up on the resources thing, honestly, I've been talking to people that some institutions that maybe you wouldn't immediately flag as thinking is a rich institution actually puts a high priority in funding their graduate students, whereas other institutions that we might think of as being, huge endowments and rich don't actually have anything available for you. So we don't know. I didn't look at it that way. The only time it came up is sometimes students would talk about, well, I already have money for the, again, making it clear that you do need this. And as long as that's clear in the application, and that has nothing to do with the institution that you're from, everybody, it's certainly not things that we know. As far as applications that aren't worth your time, again, something that's not well prepared, I would say that a lot of the applications that got denied, ultimately people came down and, not a lot, but there was a good number where people said, it's just not there yet. This project isn't there yet. That this needs a little more theory building. The student's a little too early, which is not a catch-22. I don't know, because I would encourage you to apply early because you can get that feedback and maybe apply again the next year. But that ties into, you should never look at these as a waste of time, because if you're writing to package your research, you're probably ultimately going to hopefully end up cutting and pasting some of this into a section of your dissertation. You may be able to use this to apply again for this award, to apply for outside funding. I always encourage people, if you do experimental work, look into things like the time-sharing experiments in the social sciences. Just the process of putting these applications together, I think, is actually very helpful for students to sit and really think about, what is it I'm doing in my project? And so yes, it's time consuming, but it may end up saving you time down the road on writing your dissertation, because now when in trying to explain it to somebody else, you've also actually helped clarify your own thinking and organized your own thinking. So yes, it's time consuming, but I do think that these are extremely worthwhile projects, because they're going to help you. And if you go to publish a paper, you may find that a paragraph that you used in your grant application may end up being a paragraph in a paper 3 years from now, because it helped you craft your thought. So my encouragement is just do it. And no, I don't necessarily look at the institution that a person is coming from when I'm looking at. I'm not sure I even had. Maybe we do have the access when we look through them, but that certainly is not something that crossed my mind. I evaluate each project on its face.
Maybe I just pick up on, I think whenever you're as you're becoming a part of this profession, I think it's often in the past, people thought about writing grants over here and then doing the work separate. But I think as Beth's saying, they should be one and the same. Right? I mean, writing a grant proposal should be the same kind of activity, the same kind of material that you would use in the actual project. So I think Beth is absolutely right about that. And that's a good habit to get into, especially if you do end up at a research university that requires you to go after grant funding. Sort of incorporating this as just part of your normal research process, I think, is very useful. And because this is such a condensed version of your dissertation, like it really will, I think it will show the sort of stress points, maybe the cracks in the logic, because you had to condense it down to 10 pages. And actually your actual argument is even a smaller part of that. So it should help you, I think, regardless of whether you actually get this funding or not. It should make your project better. And in terms of the institution, I've never heard that come into play, other than sometimes, honestly, I think there are people rooting for the underdogs, right? People who come from institutions not typically known for supporting graduate students, are not typically known for getting these kinds of grants. There may be a little bit of support for the underdog there. So don't count that out.
Sorry, one more thing I will add to that is I do remember there were a couple of proposals that came through of individuals who are working in a lab setting. And so if you are somebody who is working in a more lab type setting, I would just say be very clear on how this is your project, and that, not your lab's project, but this is your dissertation project. But again, not penalizing you for being in a lab, that's not certainly, but again, just make sure that it's very clear where the line is on your project and how this is going toward your personal research.
So there have been a lot of questions about COVID and how that's going to impact people's applications. So I think we'll just sort of combine them. So people are wondering how much space they should be devoting in their proposal to discussing COVID contingencies, whether it's unwise to propose international travel and field work at the moment, and how feasibility will be assessed, in light of the pandemic, or how it was last year, at least, when the pandemic, I guess, was much worse.
I don't know. You know what? When I think about it, you did remind me. Even when we were doing the assessments last year, we were like, what's COVID? I mean, like, we knew what it was, but I don't think we understood the scope. Mm-hmm. And now we're like a year later and it's changed again. I will say that, so I don't know the answer, but I will say this. I did recently get notified about getting an NSF grant, and I did have to write a COVID contingency plan. So because if I'm not mistaken, there is like an NSF component here, right? Am I missing out on that?
So it is an APSA grant, but it's meant to fill the hole that the NSF grant.
Okay.
left.
Okay. Yeah. So I did for NSF, I did have to write a COVID contingency after I was awarded the not before. So I don't know. I don't know how APSA is dealing with that. Do either of you? Do any of you? Or maybe Megan can chime in better.
So I was actually asked this question in an email, and what I said was that it should definitely be mentioned. I don't think it's wise to pretend like there isn't a global pandemic going on in your application. I don't think, alternatively, that you should devote your entire proposal to, well, here's what I'm going to do, but here's what I'm going to do if, COVID pending. So I think it's something that you should mention, and you should make it clear that you have thought about the fact that COVID might influence your research. And you should definitely talk about that, and that you have alternative plans, and maybe spend a couple paragraphs talking about it. But I don't think that you should devote, tons of time in your proposal to it. So that's how I answered the question, and maybe the reviewers feel differently if they were getting a proposal now. And I also think it depends on the nature of your specific project. If your whole project depends on being able to fly to, another country, especially if it's another country that might be more affected at the moment, then that's something that you're going to have to think about more than other folks who might be, conducting in-person interviews, but locally. So it's also going to be something that depends on your project.
So a few things that I saw last year, if you're kind of curious about maybe what a contingency might be or what that might look like, ask yourself, so if the ideal is to be able to travel somewhere and do in-person interviews, write your proposal for that. I mean, I would certainly say, again, it would probably depend on where you're trying to travel and what the current, you can only base it off of current, but ask yourself, okay, if I had to, could I do online interviews? If I did, what would that look like? Would it affect, how would this affect my timeline? Could I push my timeline back? These are some of the things to think about. But again, I think it very strongly depends upon what exactly you're aiming to do and where you would be trying to do it if it is in the field. But to much as possible, I would say, how much of this could I possibly, if we're talking about interviews, could I do them online? Could I do them via Zoom? Could I do them via Skype? What would that look like? How would that change my project?
What they said, I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, that's tricky. I think part of what we're interested in investing in is a really good idea. So that could say, I mean, I think that's the most important part. And ideally, there would be ways around COVID issues. But yeah, I probably wouldn't spend, half of the proposal outlining your alternative if you can't do the main thing you suggested.
Okay, the next question is, can you speak a little about the professional development plan component and what you're looking for with that component specifically?
I don't remember that part.
I don't remember that part either.
Yeah, so it shows you how much maybe we spent time reading.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
I don't remember that part.
I think I took it to just sort of be more of a narrative, you telling us what your professional plans are, how this fits in, right? That you're writing a dissertation with the aim to be on the academic job market, or if you're writing this dissertation and hoping to take your research to work for an NGO. I don't remember it that well, but my interpretation of that is giving us some context about you as a researcher and how this grant will help advance your future plans. So I think for most people, if you're trying to be on the academic job market, then this is going to give you a dissertation that's hopefully going to elevate your publications and elevate your job chances. But we're more looking for the merit of your project, because obviously your professional development can change too. There's a lot of.
Okay.
You put a professional veneer over this that we really needed.
Okay, the next question is, in assessing the feasibility of completing the project, how do you look at the applicant's existing training and the methods they will be using? How explicit should we be about the skills we already have and what skills we will need to develop? And how specific do we need to be about how we are going to acquire the necessary training?
Honestly, I felt like if someone just answered the questions that you laid out, I mean, just to be really explicit about it. I mean, the thing is that if you have really excellent methodological skills that are appropriate to your project, you should tell us that. That is helpful. You know, like I already know I'm going to be able to hit the ground running because I do X, Y, and Z, and I can, you know, I have these things. And it could be the case that you need to learn something. Well, I guess you will want to tell us what that is. I mean, again, that is going to feed into the plan. Maybe that's part of your plan. And it could be something, I mean, this is a really wide question because it could be like, oh, I want to do qualitative methods. And so I need to learn in vivo. Well, you can learn in vivo and, you know, over YouTube, you know, but if you're like, I don't know, I need to learn big data analytic network analysis. Well, you know, maybe we'll be like, maybe you're too early. Maybe you should learn that and then do this. So I think that if you have the skills, go ahead and let us know. If it's something that you need to learn and that's part of the project and maybe even part of the funding, then I suppose you just should be explicit about it.
I agree. I'm kind of drawing blanks here. So there's certain things that you can easily, so I supervised a master's thesis and the student learned how to do some web scraping from Twitter, taught himself. So like there are certain things that, you know, like Candace said, that, you know, with a little bit of time of YouTube or Googling and you can find somebody else's code, there's certain things that are probably easier to learn. You can be upfront that, you know, that's part of the process, or, you know, but, you know, again, I can't think of the top of my head. Like if you're somebody that has never done a single stitch of quantitative work, and you're telling me that you're going to run these very, you know, high level, or, you know, then it might start to just go, wait a minute, yeah, maybe you're not ready to do this. You know, you need another year of training. Or I mean, I guess the best thing I think of is if, you know, you told me you were going to go do work in a country's native language and that you didn't know yet or something, like, right? Like I wouldn't expect you that you're going to become fluent and be able to communicate at the level you need to in a matter of like a month. Maybe you can, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to, but right. I think it's perfectly fine to show that you are going to be acquiring skills, but showing a plan to acquire them is probably good. But for sure, make sure if you know how to do something, tell us you know how to do it. Go ahead, brag about yourself.
Yep, agree with all that. I think just be explicit about whatever it is about that.
Okay, the next question is, I plan to employ a new method, which I am involved in developing in my dissertation. However, the methodological innovation itself will not be a chapter of the dissertation. Could grant funding potentially go towards validating this method so it can be applied in my dissertation? And more broadly, are there preferences over what kinds of things we are asking for in regards to grant funding?
So it seems like if it's not actually part of the dissertation, I don't know that this could fund. It sounds like you're asking for funding the development of the method, but if it's not part of the dissertation, I don't know that that's allowable. Back up, anyone?
That was my question and why I didn't immediately jump in. But at the same time, it occurred to me that is there a reason it's not going to be a part of your dissertation? That I would say that, because I could see, you know, again, a dissertation that had a chapter validating the method and then a chapter that applies the method, you know, so maybe that's just something to think about, unless there's, I don't, again, I would have to know more about the reasoning behind this, but
Maybe it's being developed with a co-author or the dissertation advisor or something.
Yeah.
Seems like there still would be a way to work it into the dissertation, as you suggest.
Yeah, I went into advisor mode right there. So I was like, I do not know.
Yeah. There was a second part to that question that.
Yeah, so more broadly, are there preferences over what kinds of things we are asking for in regards to grant funding?
So, I mean, when I step back and think about that question a little bit more, I'm like, well, if it's part of the dissertation, then why not make the argument that you have to have this step in order to get to the next step? So I'm not, yeah, I guess, I mean, it's a very particular question. Maybe it's something that that person wants to just email me, Beth and Cameron about, and then maybe you can give us some more details and we can give you a better answer to that. It seems like a very specific question, which I'm happy to if you want to, provide more details by email.
And as far as I was racking my brain, I mean, I think we've funded a really, well, we didn't, but I think the committee was impressed by a very wide range of things. That there was money for, obviously, the more, there was money for surveys, there's money for experimental participants, there was money for, I think, somebody was, one I just think of was somebody was doing in-person interviews but needed iPads, I think, or something. I can't remember what's actually, now I'm worried I'm talking about things that aren't eligible for funding. So I'm going to be careful of what part we funded and not. But I mean, there was a really wide variety of projects.
Coding, paying coders, that sort of thing.
Research assistants came up.
Undergraduates or even, right? So.
Okay, the next question is, suppose I'm running a survey that I'm planning will cost $9,000. This is 100% hypothetical. Am I better off increasing the N of respondents to get within the DDRIG 10 to 15K range, or is that not something to worry about?
Always ask for more is my, so this is something I struggle with. So I'm actually interested to hear what the others say. I mean, there's one way where you could say, like, this is my target, however I could make do, but I always feel like when you tell someone you can make do with less, then their inclination would be to give you less. So I would say, think about your project. Would it help to expand your N? Would you need an undergraduate? We talked about, would research assistants, are there open-endeds that it would be helpful to have somebody help you do some coding on? Are you sure that that's going to be the cost of your survey too? These are things sometimes that fluctuate. Do you need to do some pre-testing of your survey? Is there some component of it that maybe it would be helpful to run a pre-test or helpful to have a follow-up? I would certainly rack your brain and expand to get within the 10 to 15 range, just because I think that's a standard best practice of anything. If there's money out there, don't leave it on the table. But that's my take.
Oh, I would actually, so as a question is, so for example, just going back to the NSF thing, like NSF will sometimes, after they say that they are going to grant you the funds, they'll say, but not this and not that. And sometimes it's a little, they actually walk away with less than what you ask for. Is there a similar process at APSA?
No.
Not generally. We'll definitely review the eligibility of the funds that are requested. And make sure that's sort of all in line, and everything that you've asked for and everything that we're funding is eligible to be funded. But we don't do a lot of sort of getting into the budget and deciding what you need or what you don't need.
Okay.
I would just think if the survey itself is going to cost $9,000, surely the analysis, the post part, you could ask for help with, right? I mean, I think as Beth was suggesting, if there's open-ended questions or other things, or even just analyzing the data, you know, employing some undergraduates to work that you would help train to do this. I mean, that's part of broader impacts, for example. And another sort of maybe piece of advice that occurred to me is don't eyeball a budget. Like if you're gonna do a survey that you're buying from somebody, get a quote for it so you do know. Because that's something that sometimes people will focus on, is like, this budget doesn't look like, this doesn't make any sense, right? It's going to cost way more than $9,000 to do this survey, right? To get the sample they want, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that's a little snuck in piece of advice, is don't eyeball your budget, actually figure out what things will really cost.
And make sure you're compensating properly as well. So again, that's something thinking about cost and tying it into ethics. Are you compensating people a fair wage? You know, are you know, these are things that I do recall having, you know, being raised in conversation. Again, everybody looks for a few different things, but you know, that's something else to think about if when you hit your budget, if think, well, gee, is this really a fair, you know, you can always just maybe increase the compensation to each respondent by a little bit, you know, stuff like that.
So we are past the hour, and I don't want to keep our panelists any longer than they can afford to stay with us. But we do have one sort of really great final question that I'll let Jessica go ahead and ask. And then otherwise, if you have additional questions, please go ahead and email us at dissertations@apsanet.com or .org. We are always happy to answer questions. So please do go ahead and reach out if you have additional questions.
Thanks, Megan. So the last question is, in a nutshell, which part of the entire application package would you say was the most important, that you pay attention to the most, or the one that you center your decision to fund or not fund around?
Well, it's not the professional development part. Sorry. I would, you know, I mean, I would read the research proposal really closely. That was the most important part, because we were trying to support ideas. And the ideas are conveyed in that part of the proposal. And then, yeah, so I mean, if the most important part, yeah, I would say we would start there. I mean, the other parts are the things that can knock you, you know, like, oh, this is a weird budget, or, oh, this is definitely not feasible. But like the first part is, oh, this is a really cool question. This is a really awesome idea. I had never thought about this issue in this way. This is a super cool perspective. And that came from the proposal part, the research part.
That's a good point. I think I always think about, is this innovative, right? Is this adding to what we know? And can this person do it? So that's not a specific, I mean, that's the proposal itself, but those are the two things I think about. Is it innovative, and can the person do it?
Yeah, agreed. Again, I think I would spend the most time on, okay, what is it that this person wants money for, right? That's basically, you know, okay, what are you going to do? Have you convinced me that what you're going to do is interesting? Have you convinced me that you are going to be able to do what you want to do? And, you know, what I want to, like, do I want to see the results when I'm done reading, like, even whether it's my field or not? But okay, great. This has me excited. Do I actually want to, would I want to read this paper? But yeah, it's your contribution. I mean, I think the most important part is again, demonstrating that you've got this really cool project that we should be interested in, and that you're going to be able to do it. And that can come from all different fields. It can come from people from all different backgrounds. I actually really enjoyed doing this last year. So it was, yeah.
Okay, I'd like to once again thank all of our panelists. I hope this has been really helpful. I also put the dissertations@apsanot.org email address in the chat for everyone. So if you have any questions or questions that are more specific to your project that you didn't feel like you could ask on the webinar, please send us an email. We're always willing to help out. And just don't forget the deadline is June 15th. So thank you, everyone. And I hope this was helpful.